Tu B'Av. We all know that Tu B'Av is a date that's mentioned in the Mishnah as a happy date when the daughters of Jerusalem would dance in the vineyards and try to convince the young men to marry them. And our custom today is we don't say Tachanun on that day. But what does one sing on Tu B'Av? What can one sing on Tu B'Av? Are there any texts that have been written? So the answer is yes. But before we can look at it, let's look at the Gemara, which asks, what is Tu B'Av? Why is this a special day at all? So let's look in the Gemara here on the last daf of Tanis, the beginning of, begins the end of the previous daf, of the second amud of the previous daf. Tu B'Av Maihi. What is Tu B'Av? So, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Yom Shehu Taru Shivatim Lavo Zeh Bazeh. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, it was the day when the tribes were permitted to marry each other. My derush zeh hadavar asher tzivo Adonai livnos tzlav chad leimor. Right, that this is the matter that God has commanded to the daughters of Tzalafchad, that they, since they're inheriting land from their father's tribe, they may not marry outside the tribe. Now, this was a restriction. Does this apply to all generations, to any women who inherit property? No. Davar zeh lo yehi noheg ela b'dor zeh. This is the matter that God commanded to the daughters of Tzalafchad, not to all generations. So, says Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, therefore, the day when they concluded this, with Tu B'Av became a Yantif. Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Nachman, Yom Shehutar Shevet Bin Yamin Lavei Bakal. Yosef says in the name of Rav Nachman, it's the day when the tribe of Binyamin was permitted to marry the rest of the other tribes. That the men of the other tribes swore at mitzvah, saying they would never give their daughters to Binyamin. Ugly story of war between the tribes. The end of Sefer Shoftim. And did this apply to all generations? No. This applies to us. We won't give our daughters to Binyamin, but our sons may give their daughters to Binyamin. And the day they concluded that, Tu B'Av. Amar Rabba Bar Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Yom Shekaluvo Mesei Midbar. It'd be Mesei Midbar, plural of Mathim. The construct of Mathim, men, is Matheh, but the construct of Meithim, I think Meithim would also be Matheh. Yes, Yom Shekaluvo Mesei Midbar. When the dead of the wilderness stop dying. What's going on? Damar Mar ad shelo kalu b'sei midbar. Lo ya diborim Moshe shneimar vayicha asher k'tam ukol anshe hamilcham balamus. Vaydaber Adonai Eli. Lemor. Eli haya dibor. Now it was only when all the tribes, when all the men in the wilderness of the generation of the Meragalim, when they stopped dying, only after that it says, God spoke to me. It doesn't just say God spoke to me. As Rashi says, there's a beyichud v'chiba, that God spoke specifically to me. There was a joy at that point because they were done dying. It was a new generation. And it was time to go into the land. And in fact, if you look at the Yerushalmi, it tells this creepy story that each year on Tisha B'Av, a karos, it's a Greek word, kerix, a herald would go out throughout the camp and announce, all dig your graves, and they would all dig their graves, or at least all the men would dig their graves, and they would lie in them that night. In the morning, they'd see how many men died. The last year, Tisha B'Av, they go into their graves, they get up in the morning, nobody died. So they say, you must have gotten the date wrong. They tried again on the 10th, the 11th, the 12th, the 13th, the 14th. On the 15th, they realized the Gzeira is over. We're not going to have the same Midbar anymore. And so they made that day Yantif. Not mentioned in the Bavli. But this idea that Kolobo B'Sei Midbar, that the B'Sei Midbar stopped dying on Tu B'Av, that is indeed here. Ula Amar Yom Shabbat Shea Ben Eila Prostios Shoshiv Yorav Amen Nevat Ala Derachim Shelo Yalu Yisrael LaRegel V'Amar Le'eze Shiyotzu Yalu. So next understanding, it's that when Yorav Ben Nevat divided the northern kingdom from the southern kingdom, he set up guards to make sure that people would not go up to Yerushalayim regel on the regalim. And then a later king of Israel, Hoshea ben Elah, he got rid of those guards and said, anyone who wants to go to Jerusalem may go. So the Gemara says that's also on Tu B'Av, and that's what they celebrate. So Masna Amar Yom Shenitnu Haruge Vesali Kvura. V'Amar Rav Masna Uso Yom Shenitnu Haruge Vesali Kvura Tiknu B'Yavna Tova Meitev Atov Shlo Yisrichu VaMeitev Shenitnu LeKvura. Next answer, it's that after the destruction of the city of Beitar, which we assume was in the year 135, the dead were left out rotting for months. And only then, on Tu B'Av, they were allowed to be buried, and the bodies hadn't spoiled, and therefore we say the bracha. Every time we bench, we say Hatova Meitiv, in memory of this, that there was at least some, was not a good thing, but the fact that the bodies didn't spoil is viewed as some kind of relief, some kind of nechama of the fact that the whole city was so brutally destroyed. Rabbi Rav Yosef, Dabrit Darvayu Yom Shepasku Milichros Eitzim Lama'aracha. So it's the day when it's not a historical event. It's each year. This is when they stopped chopping wood for the fire on the Mizbeach. And in fact, if you look earlier in the same chapter in Masechtas Tanis in the Mishnah, when it lists all the various times for bringing wood, the Korban Eitzim throughout the year, it gets to Tu B'Av. That's first of all, the largest number of days is around this season leading up to Tu B'Av and a little after. And second of all, of donating wood. And second of all, the largest number of different families that gave is on Tu B'Av itself. And so Rabbi and Rav Yosef here are saying that this is when they stopped chopping the wood. There are dates later of Korban Eitzim, but presumably that's wood that was already chopped before Tu B'Av. Why would you stop on Tu B'Av? Because this is the high point of the sun, and after that it starts to get weaker. It's not actually the highest point in heaven. That's earlier in the year, but it says it's the strongest time of the sun, and afterwards it starts to get weaker, and therefore the trees aren't as dry then. Amar of Menashe ukrole Yom Tabar Magal v'karule, and they call that day Yom Tabar Magal. They say that day is the date when they would break the sickle because they didn't need it anymore. So in this poem, this Zemer, I'd say it's not a piyut in the technical sense that I like to use of Shirat Kodesh, of Fleischer's terminology, where it's Shirat Kodesh is something that's meant to be functional inside a tefillah. This is not strictly liturgical poetry. It's a Zemer. You can use it whenever. You want to say instead of Tachanon on Tu B'Av? Great. You want to sing it at your table and you make your Tu B'Av tish? Also great. It's by Abraham Chalfun, who lived, he's one of the earliest known Yemenite poets. He lived in the late 12th, early 13th century. So, based on that, Gemara writes, Hitbasseru b'nei elyon ki nicham Hashem Tzion. Let it be announced to you. Oh, not supernal children. He's dealing with he's addressing the Jewish people. Oh, lofty children, because the Lord has comforted Zion. Certainly appropriate for these weeks of Nechama. Last week was Shabbos Nachamu. We're going to have 6 more weeks of Haftarahs of Nechama. We just did Tisha B'Av. We're coming out of that. As Kir Chasadecha Malki, I announce your kind acts, O my king. The neged kol nivraecha, which you performed, facing all your creatures. Dvar gevurot yahav hiki, and the matters of your mighty deeds. Yahav, it's classically this would be the jussive form. So let my palate express, although in piyutim the form is used as an alternative form of the future often enough. So, and my palate shall express the words of your mighty deeds. Note, like in Tehillim, will express, okay, asher pa'altam lireacha, which you wrought for those that fear you. B'hamisha asar ba'av ki nimletzu lachiki fla'echa, on the 50th of Av, because your wonders are sweet in my palate. They are pleasing to my palate. Ve'echtevemo al gilayon, and I will write them on a piece of paper. Va'ashir bam aleihi gayon, and I will sing them with music. Hitbasseru b'nei elyon ki nicham Hashem Tzion. Note that with he has to break the line b'hamisha asar ba'av ki. I put the comma there to show you where the sense breaks, but the key is because the rhyme malki hiki ki. If you break it before that word, you miss the poetry. In fact, Zeligman Bear writes in his commentary on the Kinos, specifically when he's dealing with the Krova, Avich B'Yom by the Killiri for Tisha B'Av. And he finds a passage where you have this kind of break where the sense and the line break and the sense break are in different places. And he says there's some people who criticize this, but those people don't know anything about poetry, because you see breaks like this, you see this kind of incongruence between the meaning and the sound. He says you find it in poetry of all languages. And therefore, whoever criticized it didn't know any poetry. I know about all languages. I don't know all languages, and Zeligman Bear also didn't know all languages, but certainly is a nice feature. So he started with introducing. I'm going to talk about the various events of Tu B'Av, and now he'll start listing them. So I said Mathe earlier. He has Mimethe. Great. Doesn't really matter. On this day, long ago, Mikedem Netzar, it was ended, the Negev, the Magefa, the plague from which the dead of the wilderness died. For 39 years, they were dying. Finally, now they stopped. Uvinyamin Sa'ir Rodaim, and Benjamin, the youngest tribe, Rodaim, unclear what this word means. In Tehillim, Binyamin is called Sa'ir Rodaim. It may mean Rodeh Otham, who rules over them, but it doesn't really matter what it means because the poet here is using it as a kinoi, an epithet for Binyamin. Not even really an epithet, since he says the word Binyamin straight. That is a description for Binyamin based on the line in Tehillim. L'shivte Yah Bohith Habar. He was united to the tribes of God, as we saw. The tribes had taken an oath not to marry with Binyamin, and now on Tu B'Av they allowed it. And God, who redeemed them, he found favor in them. Though he had formerly been angry at them. Because they purified their hands and their thoughts, their minds, and they cleaned their hands with cleanliness. Hitbasseru b'nei Elyon ki nicham Hashem Tzion. Ron batzchu shvatim b'yom zeh v'yeshav ha'uzit azaru. Ki vo lavo zeh v'zeh u'litchaberu taru. The tribes broke forth with joyous song on this day, and they girded themselves with might and rescue, because on this day they were permitted to enter one another, to unite. As we saw with the Benot Tzlaf, they were not allowed to marry other tribes. Here they were all allowed to marry. What's Beit Ter? That's Beitar. That those who had been murdered by the vile foe in Beitar, today they were buried. Kilo Yasa Kilayon Tsur Yahos Al Dal Ve'evyon, because the rock, God, will not make total ending, and he will have mercy on the poor. On this day, Hoshea ben Elah, King Hoshea, he put an end to the guards of the road, which Jeroboam had placed on the road to prevent them to destroy the Hag, the pilgrimage to the blessed city Jerusalem. And on that day, the princes of Segula, the Jewish people called the treasure, they stopped cutting wood for the pyre, for the Mizbeach. Because they found on this day the sun was weakened and its heat was hidden inside a concealed place, so it was no longer time for good wood to be chopped. He ends with a prayer for Nehama and for consolation or redemption. When will the splendor, which is withering away, like bigadim shebalu, clothes that withered, when will that withering glory, that withering splendor be renewed for the child who is abandoned in exile? And when will the sick heart, or the heart of the sick one, be comforted, be consoled? And may I rest from the yoke of my enemies. May my Messiah be revealed quickly, and may the Spirit rest upon him, as described in Isaiah, that in Yeshayahu it talks the Haftarah for the Achron Shal Pesach and Chutz La'aretz talks about the Nachal of Ruach Hashem, that the Messiah is going to have a spirit of God rest upon him, the king. V'yikrala asirai b'yom, and may he call freedom, redemption for my prisoners, for those in exile. Kumu v'na'alet Zion, arise and may go up to Zion. Hitbasseru b'nei Elyon, ki necham Hashem Zion. In another video, I will teach you the melody that my friend composed for this.